Welcome to Queers and Quills, the official podcast. I'm Kirt Graves, an audiobook narrator and one of the hosts of the Hoof and Fang podcast, a podcast that celebrates queer speculative fiction. On this podcast, we are celebrating storytellers from every genre and background as we prepare for the Queers and Quills conference in Portland, Oregon, May 23rd through the 25th, 2025. What is Queers and Quills? It is a romance convention for authors, narrators, and readers of stories that center on LGBTQIA Two-Spirit Plus characters and experiences, organized by Mahogany Mail and author Marley Valentine. I've invited all of the attending authors and narrators to join me for one-on-one conversations about their lives and their art, so attendees and readers from across the world can get to know them not only as professionals, but as people. My hope is that at the end of every episode, you know a little bit more about one of your favorite authors or narrators, and you'll feel a little more comfortable saying hello to them in May. That's enough talk about what I think the podcast will be. Let's dive in and find out together what it actually is. Please welcome my first guest on this podcast, an author I am honored to have worked with, the lovely and talented Annabeth Albert. Welcome!
Hello!
Annabeth Albert is a Pacific Northwest romance writer. Emotionally complex, sexy, and funny stories are her favorites, both to read and to write. Fans of quirky, Oregon-set books, as well as those who enjoy military heroes, will want to check out her many series. Her critically acclaimed and fan-favorite LGBTQ romances include The True Colors, A-List Security, Safe Harbor, Out of Uniform, and other series, along with several standalone titles. She's a dog mom, a knitter, a cook, a reluctant gym goer, you'll have to tell me your secrets later, and a first-time homeowner, which, congratulations, especially in this economy.
Yeah, I did it in May. I'm kind of crazy.
Unbelievable. So thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to chat a little bit more with you.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm looking forward to Queers and Quills, which is in my backyard in Portland.
Boy, do I wish that was a cheaper trip for me.
Yeah, I know. I've been hearing that a lot from people. The good thing is once you're here, everything is going, like food and getting around Portland is not as complicated as some of the big cities, like I would hope. Yeah. But
I actually had the chance to go to Portland last year for a little bit. We did an Oregon trip and went all around the state and spent one day in Portland. So I'm excited to get to experience the city a little bit more. But from the Midwest, that is a flight.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
And they say, you want to go to Portland? You must have money. So
because it's not a hub is the problem. Yeah. It's not a hub and it doesn't link well with the other hubs is the big. Because I'm maybe going to Chicago later this summer. And
I will be flying out of Chicago because that's where the best prices were. So hot tip Midwesterners, look to Chicago because it's the best. Now, so we're starting out every podcast with a simple question that has a complicated answer, which is, what is your author origin story?
Well, my answer is actually pretty simple. I have told myself stories to fall asleep for as long as I can remember. My mom would read to us out loud every night and until we were fairly old, older than a lot of little kids. And after she would be done, I would continue the story in my head while I was laying there. And I would send Laura and Almanzo or Anna Green Gables off on other adventures. And when I got old enough to be able to write, I would take my notebook and I would scribble little scenes for Laura and Almanzo or Anna Green Gables and Gilbert, scenes that were not in the books and nobody called it fanfic back then. But I wanted to tell stories. I told them to myself to fall asleep. I told them to my mom to entertain her. I wanted to write for as long as I could remember. But then I went to college, as you do, and graduate school, and everyone says, oh, you're never going to make it as a writer. Being a professional writer is really hard. And indeed, it took me 10 years from 2023 from 2003 until about 2013 when I landed my first deal with Kensington, I wrote probably 10 books that never saw the light of day.
Wow.
But I just had this urge to tell stories, to get out there, to be able to write books like the books I loved, because I was a romance reader from the very beginning. My favorite Laura Ingalls Wilder was Happy Golden Years. My favorite Anna Green Gables was the third of the trilogy. I loved romance. And then I started sneaking Harlequins from my grandma's house. And I even in graduate school and college, like that was what I read every break was romance. And that was always going to be the genre I wrote in, was going to be romance.
That makes so much sense. So a lot of people, I feel like, have the desire to write a full book, even if they are like sort of natural storytellers. They don't all make the actual leap. So when you got that first deal, what did that feel like?
Well, because I've been trying for about 10 years at that point, it felt amazing. It felt like all the work I'd put in was building to something. But I also knew, because I'd read a lot of advice at that point from people following them on Twitter and other places, other published writers, to not treat that as an end point, but to treat it as a launching pad for what I hope to build as a career and as a writer, and to continue to write. I think some of the best advice I got was to keep writing while you're on submission, keep writing while the book is with your editor at the publishing house. Just keep writing, because the industry is going to throw all sorts of curveballs at you. Publishing deals go through, houses close, lines close, all sorts of things happen, the rise of indie pub, and you have to be ready to pivot. And the one thing that you control is writing the next book. And so from very early, I decided that that was the thing I controlled, was just to keep writing every day.
Huh. You mentioned getting advice from folks on Twitter. Has like the online author community been a big part of your journey?
Oh, absolutely. I did participate with an in-person RWA chapter very early on, while RWA had not imploded yet. But from very early on, I was a mom to young kids, and online was how I connected with people. Yahoo message groups, Twitter, different Facebook groups, like that was how I found my people. And I think that that was really instrumental in my growth as an author, but also some of my closest friends have been people I've met online in those spheres.
Yeah. How did you then, and maybe it started from the very beginning, that very first book, but how did you find your way to writing queer characters, and what drew you to those stories?
So back in 2003, when I wrote my very first book,
Seems
which
like
was Lives Under the Bed,
ago.
it's never seen the light of day.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a very traditional male-female romance, and it never felt as good as what I'm writing now. So I'll say that. And then I was a voracious reader. And when I read Suzanne Brockman's Troubleshooters series, which had a gay storyline and eventually a male-male book, I was like, oh, this is awesome. People other than white cis couples can get happy endings. And Suzanne Brockman wrote Black heroes and Muslim heroes and Asian heroines. And I was like, oh, it can be a wide world of people out there.
Preach.
And then I discovered queer romance almost accidentally from that point. I got my first e-reader, and like a lot of people, I was on a budget. And I saw an ad for a press that had cheap ebooks that were all queer. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll give this a try because I love Suzanne Brockman's stuff. I was like, okay. And I tried a K.A. Mitchell. I got really lucky with the first one I tried. K.A. Mitchell was an early writer that just did amazing things for the genre. And something clicked in my head. And I was like, oh, I want to try. I want to see. And so that book that I was like, I want to see, that became Troublemaker.
Oh,
And
wow.
from that point, it just felt so much different than when I was trying to force myself into a box where I didn't quite fit.
Mm.
And it, both as a reader and as a writer, it felt, the more I read in queer romance, male, male, female, female, trans romance, the more I read, the more it felt like coming home. And so the more I wrote.
Yeah. I think that's such a great lesson for all of us, especially for readers, to not think that there's a certain thing you have to enjoy. Like, find what you love. And that also, that it can change over time.
Yeah.
You
And
can find things that inspire you.
well, I think the thing is I had been told early on in my writing genre, write what you know. So my
Right?
very first romance, the one that I leave under the bed, it had a heroine who was in graduate school. Hi.
Hi.
And so she was in graduate school. She was in love with her high school sweetheart. It was like so Mary Sue because
Mm.
I thought, okay, and it had to take place in this little box. And freeing myself to tell stories outside of the box that I thought I occupied has actually taught me a lot about the box I actually do occupy,
Uh-huh.
which is much bigger and broader and prettier than I ever could have imagined when I was first telling myself stories as a kid.
Yeah. Is there a version of that advice that still makes sense to you, but just with a different lens now? Write what you know, but not necessarily write your own story over and over again?
I think I would give the advice to write what feels authentic to you.
Mm.
Write what feels like it's coming from your truest, best self. And that might mean writing a character that's quite different than you. It might mean writing a character that's a lot like you. I think the advice is to tap into your authentic self. And if you are writing identities that are different than those which you occupy, I think do it carefully, do it with research, do it with love, do it with assistance. But I think that the old write what you know can be very limiting. And also it doesn't allow for that growth to discover who you really are. When I
I was just
when
going
I
to say that could be
started,
a vestige too of just like when the industry was only straight white guys writing books and every
well, and
story
I
was about a
think,
straight white guy, then sure, write what you
yeah, and
know.
I think the
Yeah.
thing was when I was in college, even college age in early 2000s, I didn't hear the word bisexual till I was in my late 20s. And then
Uh-huh.
when I first heard it, I was like, oh, there's a word for that. And it was like, but I didn't tell anyone. I didn't like the idea of like openly being, it was scary.
Yeah.
But then as I read more queer romance, as I got footing in that arena, I was like, oh, it is okay. Like there's a lot of bisexuals
Uh-huh.
here and pansexuals and demisexuals. And with every year that I am within this wonderful space, I learn more about myself, how I view gender, how I view sexuality, how I view kink identities. Like I have learned so much about myself that I wouldn't have if I had stuck to that write what you know limiting box.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how far we've come in the last 20 to 30 years. Some people don't believe me when I tell them, like, I was figuring out that I was gay before I had the words to say what that meant. I did not know the word gay when I was figuring out in adolescence that I was attracted to other boys.
Yeah,
I didn't
absolutely.
have
And
the
I
words
didn't know
for it.
that there was a word for both. I remember going
Right.
to my mom and I told her I had a crush on a female friend, and she's like, "But you still like guys, right?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, then it's just a phase.
Oh,
Everybody
yes.
gets crushes on their female friends, and it's just a phase." And I didn't know there was a word for both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild to remember that was not so long ago that none of us knew these things. Even
Well,
those
we
of us who
didn't
were
see it
living
on
it.
TV. We didn't see it in
Right.
popular culture. And that's why pioneers like Suzanne Brockman and other writers who were writing a broader world with a wider lens, like they deserve to be celebrated a lot because like Queer as Folk, like I learned so much from that show that, that I,
Same.
I I learned so much from that show and other shows that were brave enough to feature queer characters early on. And the more I learned, the more my own box expanded.
Yeah. Other than Suzanne Brockman and K.A. Mitchell, you've mentioned already, are there any other like stories or authors that have influenced you
Oh,
particularly?
so many. Like I said, I was a voracious reader. I always go back to Laurie Foster too,
Mm.
because Laurie Foster and Jennifer Cruzy, I was reading a lot of when I wrote that first sort of book. And Laurie Foster had a series that were Harlequins, and I read Mr. November, which was a calendar romance, and I was like, I could do this. I could
Mm.
write a book that's kind of like this. That's a rom-com that feels funny and smart and witty and represents people like that I would want to hang out with. And so yeah, those early romance writers I owe a lot to the people who are writing around 2000. Susan Brockman, K.A. Mitchell. I read a lot of early sort of 2008 to 2012 writers who were pioneers in the genre, out there doing the good work. Amy Lane, K.A. Mitchell. I'm trying to think of other names that are kind of escaping me
Right.
at the moment.
Whenever you have to come up with them, it's like, what? But yeah.
I know, but like I read wildly, and the thing
Hmm.
is the more I read, it always helps my writing. Whether it's something I'm reading right now or it's something I read as a kid or so. And reading outside my genre influences me a lot too. Like I
Mm.
read a lot of historical, KJ Charles, Tessa Dare, Courtney Milan. Reading historically set romances actually influences some of what I do with contemporary universes. And so I always tell people read as much as you can, and read both books on craft, read books on that do things well. Save the Cat was an early book I read that really influenced my writing journey.
Yeah. I yeah, Save the Cat Writes a Novel is one of it's sort of been my go-to as I've considered picking up the pen for the first time.
Oh, absolutely. Well, so I wrote 7 or 8 books before I read Save the Cat. And then I was like, oh, these things, beats exist. It was like,
Yeah.
and so then I tried plotting for the first time. And not surprisingly, 2 or 3 books later, that was when I started selling because turns out I'm a plotter. And it turns out that beats actually matter
Mhm.
and story arcs matter. And so I took Save the Cat and I started analyzing everything I read. I went back and I read Jennifer Cruzy's Bet Me again. I went back to Laurie Foster's Mr. November. I went back through a lot of Brockman and I analyzed it using Save the Cat. And I was like, oh, wait, this is happening. And then this is happening. And there's always this. I was like, I
Mhm.
could do that. I could do that.
Yeah. With the million different variations of ways to make it your own.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I often like to say it was kind of like Pixar, like you have beats that you want to hit, but you still want to see the whole movie.
Right.
And every movie is a little different. but we as viewers expect a certain thing from a Pixar movie or something. We know what we're going to get. And that's important. Yeah. That's the brand promise that we're making to viewers or readers.
Yeah. So in addition to Save the Cat, we want to encourage people to go read your books. So if someone, and it's hard to believe at this point that someone wouldn't have read your books, but if they're coming to you for the first time, what's a book or a series that you would say, start here?
I always go to, well, what do you like? Because I do a lot of different things. If you like nerdy, start with Conventionally Yours, Kirt and
Joel Leslie.
Joel Leslie did an amazing, I was struggling for the name. Kirt and Joel did an amazing audiobook for Conventionally Yours. It's my nerdy love letter to fandom. I think that's a great starting place. If people fresh out of college are not your thing, I think my current series, Mount Hope, which starts with Up All Night, has more mature heroes. And I think that is actually a really good introduction to what I'm trying to do through all my work as a writer, which is growing the ensemble cast and really deepening my connection with the sense of place with the small town. So if nerdy 20-somethings are your jam, Conventionally Yours. Otherwise, I'm really proud of the books I've been putting out in the last couple of years. And I think I would say Up All Night or Bring Me Home are both two series starters, that they take place in Oregon. And I'm really trying to stretch my muscle and really bring a robust ensemble to these books, not just the core couple.
I love that. Awesome. So we could talk about books all day, but this podcast is also about getting to know you, and we have a little game to play. So the rules of our game are pretty simple. I have some personal questions for you written on a deck of cards. These questions aim to learn more about you as a person, but I'm not picking which questions you will answer. Fate is. I will deal 3 cards every round, and you get to choose card 1, card 2, or card 3. Whatever card you pick, you have to answer. Sort of. So you have 2 opportunities to avoid answering a question if you need a pass. If a question comes along that you don't want to answer, you can turn the tables on me for a round, forcing me to answer the question. You can also discard a personal question in favor of answering a bookish question from the white deck.
Whoa.
But you must then answer whatever question is dealt, and people have opinions about bookish things, so you never know what you might be forced to reveal. So, are you ready to play?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Round 1, I'm dealing card 1, card 2, or card 3. Which do you choose?
Card 3.
Card 3. I think you're the first person to start on a 3. Which to the listeners makes no sense because this is the first episode they're listening to. Which talent would you most like to have?
Talent that I don't have that I would like to have. Mm-hmm. I wish I could sing. I've written a number of singers. I've written a lot of musicians. I am not a musician. My brain doesn't work like that. I really wish it did.
I love that answer. That's a good one. I almost gave away mine, but I have to save it just in case somebody turns the tables on me later. All right, here we go. Another round. Card 1, card 2, or card 3?
Card 2.
Card 2. If you could be guaranteed one thing in life besides money, what would it be?
Health. I think a lot of my readers know that I lost my beloved mother a couple years ago, and I have learned that life is really short and life is really precious, and the one thing that we don't control that we all really want and need is health.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. All right. Card 1, card 2, or card 3?
Card 3.
Card 3. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
So many. I think what I just said, actually, life is short and live accordingly. Live as if it's the saying, live as if tomorrow's your last day. Don't leave regrets. And having been through my mother's illness and other major life changes, I think that is the best advice that I'd give anyone facing a big life crisis is try not to have regrets. Live for today.
Have you found that theme making its way into your writing over the last
Oh,
couple of years?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that I have really come to value the last couple of years in my writing is better communication between characters. And that advice of don't leave things unsaid. Give people their flowers right now and don't leave things to be said later. Like, I think I do see that coming out with better communication between characters, fewer big misunderstandings. I think I value that. Mature characters who talk to each other, really, and characters that understand how precious life really is, that we do just get one body, one life, one chance at this.
Yeah. I harp on about that all the time on my other podcast because, one big misunderstanding is fun for a book. A series of small misunderstandings where nobody ever says the thing that would end this whole charade is like, come on, guys, just say, one of you just nut up and say something.
I can't do mistaken identity trope for an entire book anymore. I have to say that. If you're keeping that big of a secret and you're also being intimate with someone, I cannot suspend disbelief for that level of misunderstanding anymore.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That's one I haven't narrated yet.
And I would do mistaken identity, but it cannot last the entire book.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a great hook, but just
at least not with the person they're being intimate with, you said. Maybe they can team up and fool everybody else.
Drag it on for at least the first half of the book. And I'm like, no, he really needs to know you're his twin. Now would be good.
Now would be good. All right, let's go do another round. 1, 2, or 3.
I always want to say 3. 3.
Okay, that's it. I'm shuffling them. I'm seeing around. Which band or artist, dead or alive, would play at your funeral?
U2. I love every U2 album quite a bit. With or Without You, In the Name of Love. I was trying to remember the one that I would say is my funeral song. But I think the thing, too, is that I would tell people, funerals are for the living and play the song that reminds you of me. But I think, U2 is one of my favorite songs. One of my favorite bands, sorry. So I'd probably pick them. But a lot of people.
Yeah. All right, I think we have time for 2 more rounds. So,
okay.
Card 1, card 2, or card 3?
Card 2.
Card 2. Which living person do you most despise?
Okay, pass. We all know that the politics in the country are absolutely terrible.
You can either
now.
Turn it around on me or do a white card. Those are your pass options.
Okay, let's do a white card. I think everyone knows who we despise in the world right now, and I want
it's not hard to imagine, but we'll leave it unsaid. All right, here we go. Oh, what's the most memorable setting you've read in a book?
Oh, I have the answer to that. Okay, so Mongolia.
Okay.
Zoe. Why can't a former pen name of Eva? I'm terrible with names. Anyway, Mongolia. It's a really good book. It's part of a quartet of books that came out from the first name is Zoe. I'm gonna
People
kill myself.
People can Google it. They'll figure it out.
Yeah. But
Awesome.
it's really a great, I read it like back in 2010, and I've always remembered that, yes, Mongolia is an amazing romance
Wow.
setting.
I mean, yeah, for it to stick with you that long, like it must have
And
made
then
an
the
impression.
other one that I would say is Kira Andrews' Antarctic Romance, where they are at Antarctica, and that's a really good one.
All right. Okay, last one. Card 1, card 2, or card 3?
Card 1. I haven't said one
You
yet.
haven't picked card 1 yet. That's true. Ooh. What's your recurring nightmare?
My actual literal recurring nightmare is falling.
Okay.
Like I wake up and I'm falling.
Yep.
I think my biggest personal nightmare would be losing my sight, because I rely so much on the typing and the reading, and as much as I love audiobooks and wonderful narrators like you, there's no real substitute for me for reading, and I would miss that tremendously. So I worry about losing my sight, maybe more than most people. Yeah, that would be my nightmare.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for playing the game and for being so forthright. A couple of those took a turn, but for the most part, I really enjoyed just getting to know more about you and finally getting a chance to chat after all these years of having worked together.
Yes,
really
thank
great.
you. And yes, it was kind of meandering. I am just as disorganized in person. If you see me at Queers and Quills, anyone watching this, do come up, say hi, ask me about places to eat in Portland. Tell me your favorite coffee flavor. I want to get to know you. And if you're an aspiring writer, come up and talk to me. I want to hear what you're writing. I want to hear what your dreams are. Absolutely seek me out at the conference.
I love that. I love that. So thank you, Annabeth, for joining us. And thank you guys, listeners, for joining us for the first episode of Queers and Quills, the official podcast. We have a lot more people to meet in the coming months, and I hope you'll join me in getting to know all of these incredible artists. If you're already signed up to attend Queers and Quills, make sure to say hello to me and to Annabeth at the Oregon Convention Center in May. If you're not, follow Queers and Quills on Instagram to follow along with all the fun this year and get updates about ticket availability in the future. Until next time, I'm Kirt Graves, and I hope you're having a very gay day. Queers and Quills, the official podcast, is produced and hosted by Kirt Graves, in coordination with Mahogany Mail and Marley Valentine. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.